Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. Created by speakers for speakers. It's your fast track to sharper skills, bigger impact, and a smarter speaking business. Subscribe and download using the link below. And step into the spotlight.
Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. My name is Thom Singer, and you might remember me from 21 and 2022 when I hosted Speakernomics. And in 2026, I'm going to be back in the chair part-time. So moving forward with Speakernomics in the new year, we have actually refreshed the Speakernomics platform with a bold new format. And we're going to have a rotating lineup of hosts and conversations designed to bring you fresh, diverse perspective and new ideas every single week. So every episode, we're going to drop on a Tuesday, and each week you're going to hear from a different host, and you're also going to hear from a different guest who is a world-class subject matter expert. And today you are in store for a treat. So we want to make sure moving forward that this show lives up to everything we promise, and that is we want to leverage voices that lift up the world while helping you build a better business and become a better and more impactful speaker. So today, I am really honored to have Hall of Fame speaker Don Yaeger here in the chair for the first episode of 2026. Don, welcome to Speakernomics.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
So for those of you who don't know Don Yaeger, and you really should know Don Yaeger, he is a Hall of Fame speaker who started off his career writing at Sports Illustrated, back in the day when Sports Illustrated had its heyday. And then he left there to become an author. He has actually gone out and written something like 40 books, 13 New York Times bestsellers, and he took that and parlayed it in to a very successful speaking career. And he is going to be one of the featured keynote speakers at Influence 2026 in Austin, Texas, my town. That's where I live. So we're really excited to have Don here on Speakernomics. So Don, let's get started. What are two basic tips that you think every speaker needs to know?
Two things I would say every speaker should know is one, constantly be in the development of new material. Always be looking for new content. How are you driving? What are you doing? And second, always be looking for multiple streams of income. And then how can you weave those streams of income together to help build a rope that will keep you afloat, even will be your savior even in tough times.
Nice. Well, we're going to start off unpacking those two tips, and then we're going to talk a little bit about your influence speech. And then finally, I also want to find out a little bit about how you became a speaker, because if we lined up 100 successful professional speakers, you're going to get 100 different stories. So let's take a look at that first tip. You said constantly be looking for fresh ideas, for fresh content. And a lot of speakers I know have been using the same content for, I've been in NSA for 18 years. Their keynote's the same now as it was then, except for, some little tweaks because, 18 years ago, you didn't have social media. So why are you always looking for fresh content, and how does a speaker do that?
Well, I'm going to answer those questions in reverse. I think the answer to how do they do that is you're looking for stories that can and things you can learn that can become additive to what you're already doing. I'm not saying you have to eliminate your signature story if you've got one, but whatever it is you do, try to be looking for new material that will add to it. For me, the model's pretty simple. I write books, and I write lots of them. And in that process, Tom, over the last decade, I chase books that allow me to develop new material. I'm looking for books that will give me, and it's valuable in two ways. Number one, and it plays into the second tip, which is multiple streams of income. So A, I get paid to write books, right? But B, by developing content around those books, I can sell those books at the back of the room, right? And so, or pre-sell them to clients if they're running a large enough event. And so the idea of constantly being in search of new material keeps me fresh, right? It means I've got something new to offer all the time. And that ability obviously means that also there are clients that can hire me multiple years over the course of time because I've got something new to offer them. So yes, I would tell you that first one is an absolute, because doing that has allowed me to. There are clients I'm speaking for in 2026 who I first spoke for a decade ago.
So it's interesting because starting off as a sports writer, I assume that a lot of your books have been sports, but not all of your books necessarily have been sports focused. So do you think because you've covered sports and there's so many different types of sports, there's so many famous people that you know personally that you can interview and things like that, does that give you an edge for finding fresh material because you're just exposed to, the good news about sports, you got new star players every couple of years?
It might give me an edge, but I think the edge is really more in the way I think than in the access to people. I'm constantly looking at what's happening in the world and imagining how I would tell that story if I could know it better, right? And then every once in a while I'll make an outreach and say, hey, I'd like to help you tell your story. And because of the success I've been lucky enough to have in the writing world, all the New York Times bestsellers are it's kind of hard to compete with. But that ability allows me to get access to people to help write their stories. And then in doing that, I then have their stories as content for my speeches.
So as somebody who's written several books myself, not nearly as many as you, people often ask me, like, what's your favorite book? Do you have one or two that really stands out, and why that those books impacted speaking maybe more than some of the others?
Well, I'm contractually obligated to say my next book is my favorite.
Your next book is always my favorite book. That is
Book
true.
is always my favorite. You got it. That's the publishers always require that. No, there are several. I mean, there's a book that I wrote with with an NFL football player whose mother was a police officer. She was shot and killed in a robbery at a bank when he was 18 years old. He goes to college, brings his three youngest brothers and sisters with him, puts them through elementary school while he's playing college football, goes to the NFL, starts buying homes for women like his mother, wins the Walter Payton Man of the Year award, and as a result gets a chance to write a book, asked me to help him. And to finish the book, he and I go to death row to meet the guy that killed his mom.
Wow.
And we sit on death row, and at the end of the hour, he looks at the killer, and he says, "I came here today to forgive you." Most amazing thing I've ever experienced. But that opportunity to be there in that moment, because I was writing a book, allows me to tell an extraordinarily impactful story as well, and about the lesson I learned being in that room. Probably another one would be I got a chance to live the last few weeks of his life with Walter Payton, the great running back from the Chicago Bears. He was dying. He knew he wouldn't live, and he wanted to write a book, and he asked me to be that writer and to live with him as he was fighting. And that changed my life. I mean, the opportunity to be, chosen by one of the greatest of all time, to sit, at his knee every day, was a game changer.
Well, a speaker is really good when he can make the Speakernomics host get choked up in the middle of a story. I felt that kind of in my heart there as you told that story. So I want to move on to the second tip of figuring out multiple streams of income. This is something that as long as I've been in the business, we've heard. I ignored it for the first 12 years I was in the business because I had what I call a traditional, old-fashioned keynoter business, right? That was my only stream of income. I would show up, I'd give a speech, they'd give me a check, and I'd go on to the next one. And as much as everybody said, oh, you should have other streams of income, I was like, why? This is working. Until 2020, when my stream of income dried up for 2.5 years for all practical purposes. And so now I'm doing exactly that advice. I'm finding other streams of income. I'm chasing multiple lanes at the same time. But what advice do you have for people besides do it to be able to figure out what those are for them? Because everybody's going to have a little bit different take.
So I think that would be the big question. What are the other things you could do? And let's take 2020. That is really what solidified it for me as well. I was always writing books, but I always had a vision that I could write one book a year, maybe a book every 18 months, until 2020 when I lost all my speaking income. And I have a team of employees, people that work for me in my content development world, and I realized that I needed to feed a handful of mouths, and I'd lost more than 50% of my income. And so I reconfigured my book writing business, and in the middle of all that, started a podcast. And because the world needed one more podcast in 2020. But at the end of the day, I picked a lane for my podcast that was additive to my speaking business. I decided to interview executives at large Fortune 500 companies, many of them companies I wanted to speak for one day, interviewing the executives about playing sports at an earlier stage of their life and what did being an athlete teach them about leadership. To do that, I did unbelievable research at the beginning of every interview, so that when I sat down with the person, I would, I'm talking to Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, right? And I'm able to name for him his high school football coach. And when Brian Moynihan realizes that, like, he hadn't thought about this coach in 25 years, and here's this guy reminding him and talking to him about the field is named after your coach. I'm sure you know that, and he actually didn't. And so knowing more on the front end than even your guest expects you to allows you to leave them wowed. And at the end of the day, I ended up doing a number of speeches for Bank of America. So, each one of these things became additive to the speaking side of life when speaking came back. But I did it in pursuit of additional streams of revenue, and all of them tie themselves together. None of them are independent. They're all linked because that's the way I think.
Sure. So how can we get speakers to think more like you?
Well, I think they need to sit and evaluate themselves. What are other ways? What are other skill sets that I possess that could be additive to my business, right? And maybe it's, hey, in addition to being a keynoter, maybe I'm good enough at being an interviewer that I could offer that skill set at their event, right? Let me keynote in the morning, and in the afternoon interview your CEO on the stage. Now I've got a second reason to be there. I'm already there anyway, and you pay me a little extra money, and I've added revenue to my stream, right? And at the same time, you're just taking advantage of a skill set you already possess.
So I love the fact that you just gave me a great idea, because that's exactly something I hadn't really thought of before, but I'm a pretty good interviewer, and I probably could offer exactly that. So while you were saying that, I was writing down, I have a brand new offering that goes with my keynote as of 9 seconds ago.
Well, good. That is what Speakernomics should be all about.
So the other thing before we move on, I want to touch on is you said something that I don't want people to have missed. And that was, you interviewed the CEO of a company and you did real deep research, because you had to go a little deep to find out his high school coach's name and to find out that their high school stadium had been named after their coach. How do you do that research?
Well, part of the cheat code is I live in a university town, and we have a very active internship program. And any given semester, we have between 4 and 6 interns from Florida State University, from their sports management program. They want to work here because I'm going to introduce them to so many people in the world that they're interested in. But I give them assignments. Hey, I want to interview Brian Moynihan. Tell me everything I need to know. Where did he play? He played rugby at Brown. I know that. But where did he play in high school? At high school, tell me about his high school football. And much of that content and detail is available if you go out and look at things as simple as classmates.com. You can find the high school yearbook that Brian Moynihan is pictured in. And when you send him that in advance and say, hey, by the way, this is what I'm going to talk to you about, and he opens it up and sees a picture of him in high school, it immediately tells him this cat is doing something other people aren't doing. And the better they see me before we even turn the microphone on, the more likely I am on the back end to be in relationship with them.
God, and that's great. The other thing then is, what else do you have these interns do? Because so many speakers, myself included, people are like, oh, you could have a summer intern from the university. And I'm like, what in the world would I have them do? So what are some tasks? If you have 4 or 5 of them a year, you've got them doing a lot of tasks.
But it's all around the podcast. Everything is around prep for the podcast. We actually have, I mean, but again, we have, we've got it down pretty well. We send a gift in advance. We at the end we send them one of my books in advance, right? To which is good because then they often talk to me about what they learned reading my book. Which you get the CEO of Delta Airlines, you get the CEO of Target, the CEO of Disney talking to you about what they learned reading your content, and that's just a credibility builder all across the board.
Nice.
Condoleezza Rice sits there and talks to me about what she learned reading a book that I wrote because we sent it to her. And then afterward, we sent them all. We have a shirt that says the word "compete" because the podcast is called the Corporate Competitor Podcast, and it's a workout shirt. Just says the word "compete" across the front, and they all take pictures working out in my shirt and send. And we have all these pictures of some of the biggest names in American commerce wearing our shirt, and it's that helps us get further guests. So we have this entire we have a system, and those interns are the lubricant of that system.
Nice. Well, that was all of that was very, very good. So, as I said in the introduction, you are going to be one of the featured keynote speakers at Influence 2026 in Austin. And I was really excited when I saw that announced a couple of weeks back because I've known who you are. I've been really active in the National Speakers Association for 18 years, but I never saw you speak until we both were at MIT last April, I think it was, for a group of 75 CEOs for a couple of day program. And I had never had the opportunity. I made sure I was in the room when you went up, and I nodded my head, and the person next to me said, "He's really good." And I said, "Well, he's a Hall of Fame speaker." And the person next to me was like, "There's a Hall of Fame of speakers?" And I said, "Yeah. And there's your example of why." So I understand why you've been chosen to speak at Influence, but what are you going to talk about?
Well, I in the prep for it for the time there, we've actually had some really great conversations with Candace and the team at NSA. I'm going to open with sharing a signature story, and I think all of us as speakers have, one or two or multiples, but I'm going to share a story I've been sharing for years that I've built and grown to the place that it's captivating enough. It's a signature story for me in many speeches. But then I'm going to kind of rotate into a second lesson I've learned in my career. It was a lesson I learned from a basketball coach named John Wooden. And Coach Wooden was my mentor for 12 years, and we ultimately wrote a book together. But Coach Wooden once told me that you're never going to outperform your inner circle, and that if you're not always improving your inner circle, the mistake is yours. And so it has been my life's mission since learning all of that from Coach to constantly be growing my circle, which is why I'm a member at NSA, and it's why I hope people will be there and will leave there with a better circle than when they arrived.
Well, I'm a big believer. People ask me, how do you get into the speaking business? I tell everybody the secret to being successful in the speaking business is you have to have a lot of speaker friends. Who is that inner circle of speaker friends you have? And I say it's not some coach that you pay. It's not someone who owns a online course that you bought. It's not a transactional thing. It's who are actually your friends, because I believe success leaves clues. So how can you get speakers to be more excited about having that inner circle, both of speakers and of other people who are going to influence them to grow their business?
Well, I tell them that I think I'm a living example. You are too. I would guess that if you went down the line and you looked at the best of the best that are there in that room, they would all say exactly that. They're the product of the relationships built, and in that, and they didn't sit back and hope for those relationships. They went out and built them, and so my encouragement while we're sitting there in that room is that people look around the table and realize I'm probably in the room with some pretty amazing folks, and I'm not going to leave here without knowing a few of them so well that I can reach out when I need it.
So I want to go back to the first part of your speech where you're going to talk about a signature story. When I got into the business 17, 18 years ago, I remember going to influence and going to breakouts, and people talked a lot about the power of that signature story. It wasn't talking about the destroyer and the lighthouse. It wasn't talking about how grandma cut the ends off the ham. It wasn't talking about throwing starfish into the water. It was, what's a story that you can tell that someone else can't necessarily steal? I mean, I guess people could steal anything they want, but it's not something generic. It's something that you either know of firsthand or very close to. I don't know that advice is given quite as much anymore. There seems to have been a lot of advice put on research and data, which are obviously important. But I haven't heard a lot recently about the signature story. So I kind of got all tingly when you said you're going to start your speech talking about signature story and sharing one of yours.
So I gave you a piece of business advice and I made you tingly all in the same
Yeah, all in the same podcast. I have a new
strong.
piece of business advice and I tingled. So that's good.
Good.
So let's talk about the importance of signature stories. Why do you think they're so important?
Well, because I think they, well, first off, I hope if it's a signature story, you're delivering it often enough that you're gonna get really good at delivering
Good at
it,
it.
right? You know, one of the things I cringe at when I hear this from other speakers is how, well, I customize every speech I do. If you're really customizing every speech you do, you're never giving a great speech, right? You should tweak every speech you do, but if you're customizing every speech, then that's the first and probably last time you'll deliver it, and you're going to deliver it like a person that's delivered the speech for the first and last time.
That's good advice. That's really good advice.
And a signature story is one that you can lean into in a way that will just blow people away. Like they will go, my gosh, that story is, you know, it's been, and a good signature story is tested through time and improved in that process. And so it's really not completely the same every time somebody hears it, because you just get a little bit better. You're watching the audience. You're trying to feed off of what's making people lean forward, and as you do it, you get better. The content gets better, and your reputation gets better.
Well, and like comedians, right? They have new material, but they always have some really strong material there if they need to put it in. I was giving a speech one time and my signature story wasn't part of the speech, but I could feel throughout the speech that it wasn't connecting as much. And so on the fly, I decided to change my ending and put in a story that I knew was really powerful. And as you said, it made a difference to that audience because made a difference to that one. No, it made a difference to that audience because it was
Going
a really
starfish on me. Be
yeah,
careful.
no. But it was a really, I mean, it's a powerful story, but it wasn't the first time I delivered it. It was about the 500th time I've delivered it. And I remember when I got in the business, I read an article by Roxanne Emmerich, and she said that you're never going to be great as a speaker until you've at least delivered 300 professional speeches. And I think that's true of a story too. I think you have to give it several times before it's going to be great.
Well, I will tell you, before I became a professional speaker, I'm an entrepreneur of you know, I love owning businesses and have owned many. But one of the businesses I owned was a comedy club here in my hometown of Tallahassee, Florida, and we would get great comedians every week, but on about a quarterly basis, some big name Carrot Top, you know, would come play our small club, but they would do it because they were practicing new content and they wanted to do it in front of a live audience. And you recognize that that's how they become great. They didn't become great by doing this shtick, you know, on the Tonight Show for the first time. They didn't become great by playing in the Super Bowl the first time they've touched a football. No, they are great because they're going to small clubs and getting better.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to see you on the main stage and hear the whole of this speech. I think it's going to be very powerful, and I think that you're going to have a real big impact. But before I let you go, I do want to ask you, how did you really become a speaker? Because as I said, if you lined up 100 speakers, you're going to get 100 different stories of how we all got into this business. So if we go back to, you know, young out of college sports writer Don Yaeger, how did you go from there to being a world-class Hall of Fame speaker?
Well, had nothing to do with young and out of college. I was deep into my career as a journalist, and I was, as you mentioned at the beginning, I was a senior writer. I was a writer at Sports Illustrated, where they only have 30 of those writers in the entire world, so it's a pretty good job. And but many of my friends were people who were in the sporting industry. Many of them were regularly delivering speeches and making a pretty nice little income on the side doing so. But we'd sit around, tell stories, and I would tell stories, and I'm a storyteller. And finally one day, Dale Brown, a basketball coach at Louisiana State, Coach Shaq and a bunch of other people, Dale grabbed me and he goes, "Man, you know what? If you went to and stood in front of an audience and told the same stories you're telling right here, you could make $1 or $2." And as I said, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a big believer in the American way, and so I thought I want to see if that's true. And didn't make much money for a while, as is true for most of us, but I had the fortitude to stick it out, and and here we are, 15 years in, and as you said, lucky enough to be in the Hall of Fame, and lucky enough to get to do it often enough that it pays the bills.
And so, like you said, you started off, you didn't make much money. You had another job that, you were working, you had other stuff that you were doing. What advice do you have for that new speaker who's been at it a year or maybe a couple of years, and they feel like, God, I'm just banging my head against the wall every day?
Well, you're going to hear this advice over and over again, right? The more you speak, the more you speak. So go out and do that. I mean, I think I delivered 80 speeches my first year that I was doing it, but I was doing them. If you gave me gas money, I'd come speak for you.
I used to say I'd do it in the early days for $1.95 and a chicken dinner.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think the first year, we were looking at the numbers the other day, I think I made $39,000 speaking 80 times, right? Which is crazy if you think about it. But I got better, and I got better, and I developed a list. Because what happened is people would come up, give me a card. "Man, I really like your content. Maybe my company could use you." And so I started collecting cards, and then I would stay in touch with people on a regular basis by constantly writing something that I thought they might be interested in. And pretty soon you develop a following, and the following is what ultimately takes you to the next level.
Well, Don Yaeger, it's been an absolute pleasure for me to have the opportunity to interview you here on Speakernomics. Any final words for the NSA community and the worldwide community of speakers? Because it's not just NSA people who listen to this podcast; it's listened to by speakers everywhere.
Well, I think it's one of the most honorable professions because you get a chance on a daily basis to get feedback. Right? It's difficult in most professions to get feedback immediately. But when you're speaking, you're looking at the audience. You see if they're hiding their phone under the table and really checking the baseball scores from last night. You see whether they're leaning in or they're locked into your content. You get that feedback in real time. And that's hard to do, but boy, man, it can make you better. We have a phrase around our office that feedback is the breakfast of champions. And we're constantly seeking feedback.
So it's not Wheaties after all.
It's not Wheaties after all.
Right. Feedback is the breakfast
of champions.
Nice. Well, once again, Don, thank you for being here. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. It's 2026. We're moving forward with Speakernomics. The staff at NSA and everybody on the Speakernomics committee is really excited about the changes that we're making. You're going to have different voices every week. So you'll hear from me again in about 4 weeks, but you'll have some other people who have different interview styles, interviewing different legends in our business who can bring different points of view. So you're going to want to tune in every week because you never know what you're going to get. And like we said when we started out, we want to make sure that we're living up to that promise, that we're here to help you build a better business and become a better and more impactful speaker. We'll see you next week right here on Speakernomics.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Speakernomics. If you want more bookings, credibility, and connections, your NSA community is waiting for you. Join NSA today. Click the link below and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and download this podcast wherever you listen.